Imagine a scruffy man rushing into a high-end vet clinic, cradling a trembling pit bull in his arms, only to be sneered at and turned away like trash. The staff laugh, calling him a broke nobody, until the dog collapses, convulsing on the pristine floor, and the man's quiet fury erupts. What they don't know, this nobody is Keanu Reeves, and he's about to flip their world upside down in a way they'll never see coming. How far would you go to save a life that others dismiss? Stick around for a wild ride where compassion clashes with cruelty, secrets unravel, and justice lands a knockout punch, right where it hurts most. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below and let us know if you'd fight for the underdog like Keanu. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe for the full story. Keanu Reeves didn't look like a Hollywood star that morning. In a faded gray t-shirt and worn jeans, he could have been any guy who'd seen a few too many hard days. Someone you'd pass without a second glance. But his heart? That was pure gold, the kind that doesn't need a spotlight to shine. He'd slipped away from the glitz to visit Hope Shelter, a little rescue haven he'd quietly poured his soul into for years. No fanfare, no cameras. Just a man who cared more about four-legged outcasts than red carpet applause. As he pushed open the door, the familiar chorus of barks hit him like an old friend's hello, and he felt that tug in his chest, the one that always came when he stepped into their world. Sophie, the young receptionist, lit up the second she saw him. "Mr. Reeves!" she exclaimed, her voice warm with surprise. "We weren't expecting you today." Her smile was the kind that could melt even the grumpiest cynic, and Keanu returned it, leaning against the counter like he belonged there. "Hey, Sophie," he said softly, his tone carrying that gentle gravel of a man who's lived a lot but still hopes for better. "Just wrapped a project, thought I'd check in, how's everything holding up?" Her face dimmed, and Keanu caught it instantly, a flicker of worry that stabbed at his gut. "We've got a tough one," she admitted, her hands fidgeting. "A pit bull named Titan. Pulled him from a dumpster last week, skin and bones, shaking like a leaf from seizures. Daniel's with him now." The words landed heavy, and Keanu's jaw tightened. He'd seen too many stories like that, dogs tossed aside like garbage, and every one carved a little deeper into him. "Where's Daniel?" he asked, already moving toward the back. "Out with the kennels," Sophie called after him. "He'll be glad you're here." Keanu found Daniel crouched by a kennel, his weathered hands stroking a dog that looked more like a shadow than a fighter. Titan's ribs jutted out under patchy fur, and his amber eyes held a weary spark, like he'd been through hell but wasn't ready to quit. Daniel glanced up, his lined face breaking into a grin. "Keanu! Didn't know you were in town, man." There was relief in his voice, the kind you hear from someone carrying too much alone. "Just finished a shoot," Keanu said, dropping to one knee beside him. "Sophie told me about this guy. What's his story?" Daniel sighed, rubbing Titan's head. "Found him in a trash heap. Some jerk dumped him there, sick, starving, seizing up from God knows what. He's a tough little soldier, though. No fits for a couple days, till now." Keanu reached out, slow and steady, letting Titan sniff his hand. The dog's nose twitched, then pressed against his fingers, a tiny surrender that hit Keanu right in the chest. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, voice thick with something raw. "You've been through it, huh?" Daniel watched them, then handed Keanu a leash. "Think you could take him for a walk? Fresh air might calm him down. I've got a meeting to prep, but I trust you with him." Keanu nodded, clipping the leash on. "I've got him," he said, and meant it. More than just a walk, it was a promise. Titan staggered to his feet, shaky but willing, and they headed out. Keanu kept his pace slow, talking low to the dog as they went. "You're stronger than they know, Titan. We'll get you through this." They hadn't gone far when it happened. Titan's legs buckled, a tremor rippling through him like a storm breaking loose. His body jerked, a soft whine escaping as he collapsed onto the pavement. Keanu dropped beside him, hands steadying the pit bull's trembling frame, heart pounding with a mix of fear and fury. "Hang on, buddy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm not losing you." He'd seen seizures before, too many times at shelters like Hope. But watching Titan fight through one tore at him, like it was the first. He scooped Titan up, the dog's weight a fragile burden in his arms, and made a call right then. Silver Paw Veterinary Clinic wasn't far. A sleek place he'd funded years back, though he'd never waved that flag around. No one there knew the scruffy guy in jeans had signed the checks that built it. But as he hurried toward it, Titan limp against his chest, Keanu felt a fire ignite. He didn't care who they thought he was. He'd make them help this dog. Or they'd answer for it. "Hold tight," he told Titan, determination hardening his voice. "We're getting you fixed up no matter what it takes." Keanu burst through the doors of Silver Paw Veterinary Clinic, Titan cradled in his arms like a child clinging to life. The place hummed with sterile efficiency, white walls, polished floors, the faint buzz of wealth in the air. His clothes were a mess now, streaked with dirt from Titan's collapse, and the pit bull's shallow breaths against his chest fueled a quiet panic he fought to keep in check. He didn't care how he looked, all that mattered was the trembling dog he'd promised to save. But as he stepped up to the reception desk, he felt the shift, a cold, judging weight in the room that hit him before a word was even spoken. Emily, the receptionist, glanced up from her computer, her perfectly manicured nails pausing mid-tent. Her eyes raked over him, his faded shirt, his scuffed jeans, the limp dog in his grip, and her lip curled, just enough to sting. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain, like she'd already decided he was beneath her tone. Keanu squared his shoulders, forcing calm into his tone despite the storm brewing inside. "This dog's having seizures. He needs a vet. Now." Emily leaned back, crossing her arms as if his urgency was some kind of insult. "We don't do charity cases here," she snapped, her words sharp as a slap. "You got cash, or are you just going to waste my day?" Keanu's jaw clenched, a flicker of anger sparking in his chest. He'd faced judgment before, years of it, in and out of the spotlight. But this cut deeper because it wasn't just about him. It was about Titan, helpless and fading. "I'll pay," he said, voice low and firm. "Get the doctor out here." She smirked, a cruel little twist of her mouth, and hit the intercom with exaggerated slowness. "Dr. Grayson, we've got someone at the desk." The way she said "someone" hung in the air like a taunt, and Keanu felt the eyes of the waiting room turn curious, pitying, dismissive. A moment later, Dr. Victor Grayson strode out, his white coat pristine, his posture radiating arrogance. He stopped short, sizing Keanu up with a look that could have curdled milk. "What's this?" he demanded, folding his arms. "You bringing strays in here now?" Keanu set Titan gently on the floor, the dog's frail body trembling even in stillness. "He's not a stray," he said, meeting Grayson's gaze head-on. "He's from Hope Shelter. He's seizing, needs treatment right away." Grayson barely glanced at Titan before scoffing, a harsh bark of a laugh that echoed off the walls. "Hope Shelter? That dump for rejects, people like you, don't belong here," he sneered, stepping closer, his voice rising for the audience of well-dressed clients clutching their pampered pets. "Take that mangy mutt and get out before I have you thrown out." The words landed like a punch, but Keanu didn't flinch. He'd heard worse in his life. Cruelty wasn't new, but this wasn't about pride, it was about the dog at his feet, the one he'd sworn to protect. "You're a vet," he said, slow and deliberate, each word heavy with restrained rage. "Your job is to heal, not to pick and choose who's worthy. Look at him. He's suffering." Grayson's face twisted, a mix of contempt and amusement. "My job?" he shot back, leaning in so close Keanu could smell his overpriced cologne. "My job is to run a business, not play saint for every bum who drags in a half-dead wreck. Take your raggedy dog and go." The waiting room went silent, the air thick with tension. A woman in pearls clutched her poodle tighter. A man in a suit shifted uncomfortably. Keanu's hands balled into fists, but he kept them at his sides, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "You'll regret this," he said, eyes locked on Grayson's. "Not because of who I am, but because of what you're doing. Or not doing." Grayson laughed again, louder this time, turning to Emily for backup. "Hear that? He thinks I'll regret it?" Emily snickered, shaking her head. "Probably gonna beg for handouts out front next, typical." Keanu bent down, scooping Titan back into his arms, the dog's warmth a lifeline against the coldness around him. He could feel the weight of their scorn, the way it stripped him down to nothing in their eyes. But he'd been stripped bare before, by loss, by grief, and he'd come out stronger every time. This wasn't over. "You've got no idea what you're starting," he said, more to himself than to them, but loud enough for Grayson to catch. The doctor waved a dismissive hand, already turning away. "Start whatever you want, pal. Door's that way." As Keanu stood there, Titan's faint whimper cut through him like a knife. He thought of all the animals he'd seen abandoned, all the people who'd turned their backs, people like Grayson who wore their oaths like cheap costumes. He'd funded this place once, poured his heart into it, believing it could be different. Now, it was a mockery of everything he stood for. His mind raced. Silverpaw was about to learn a lesson it wouldn't forget, and he'd be the one teaching it. "Hang on, Titan," he murmured, holding the dog closer, his resolve hardening like steel. "We're not done fighting." The sterile air of Silverpaw Veterinary Clinic felt suffocating as Keanu sat in the waiting room, Titan cradled in his lap. The pit bull's breathing was shallow, his muscular frame trembling faintly, a silent warning of the storm brewing within. Keanu's eyes never left the dog, his hands stroking Titan's coarse fur in a futile attempt to soothe him. The murmur of other clients faded into the background, their curious glances and hushed whispers irrelevant to the urgency tightening his chest. He'd endured the insults, the mockery from Dr. Victor Grayson and Emily, but he wasn't here for pride. He was here for Titan. Suddenly, Titan's body went rigid. His legs stiffened, eyes rolling back as a violent seizure tore through him. Foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth, and his powerful jaws clenched uncontrollably. Keanu dropped to his knees on the cold tiled floor, cradling Titan's head to keep it from slamming against the ground. "Help!" he shouted, his voice raw with desperation. "He's seizing! Somebody, please, do something!" The room spun into chaos. Clients gasped, a child whimpered, but the clinic staff remained eerily still. Emily, perched behind the reception desk, flicked her eyes toward the scene with a bored indifference before returning to her computer screen. Dr. Grayson emerged from an exam room, his white coat pristine, his expression a mask of disdain. He stopped short, arms crossed, observing Titan's thrashing form as if it were a mildly interesting inconvenience. "Get that mud out of here," he barked, pointing toward the glass doors. "I told you, we don't treat strays." Or their owners. His voice dripped with contempt, each word a dagger aimed at Keanu's resolve. Keanu's hands trembled as he held Titan, but his gaze locked onto Grayson with a ferocity that belied his disheveled appearance. "He's not a stray," he said, his tone low and dangerous. "He's a survivor, and he's dying. You're a vet, act like one." Grayson took a step closer, towering over Keanu, his lips curling into a sneer. "Act like one? I don't waste my time on freeloaders who can't pay. Take your sob story and that filthy dog out of my clinic, or I'll have security drag you both out." The threat ignited something primal in Keanu. He rose to his feet, Titan still convulsing in his arms, and squared his shoulders. "You'd rather let him die than lift a finger? What kind of man are you?" His voice cracked with emotion, the weight of Titan's suffering fueling every syllable. Grayson laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the clinic's polished walls. "The kind who runs a business, not a charity. Now move, or I'll make you." Before Keanu could respond, a well-dressed woman with a sleek cat carrier stepped forward from the waiting area. Mrs. Margaret, her silver hair neatly pinned, clutched her purse tightly, her face etched with concern. "Doctor," she said, her voice trembling but firm, "this man's been waiting longer than I have. If his dog's in danger, shouldn't you help him first?" "I can wait." Her kindness pierced the tension like a ray of light, and for a fleeting moment, Keanu felt a flicker of hope. Grayson's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Margaret, stay out of this. You're a paying client. He's not. Don't let his act fool you. He's probably scamming for free treatment." Margaret hesitated, her gaze shifting between Keanu and the doctor, but Grayson waved her off dismissively. "Your cat's appointment is next. This clown can wait. Or leave. His choice." Titan's seizure began to subside, his body slumping into an exhausted heap, but the danger wasn't over. Keanu could feel the dog's heartbeat racing beneath his fingers, fragile and erratic. He set Titan gently on the floor, ensuring his safety, then stood to face Grayson. The room fell silent, every eye on the confrontation unfolding. "You're a disgrace," Keanu said, his voice steady now, cutting through the air like a blade. "You took an oath to heal, not to judge. Did you swear to save lives, or just the ones with money attached? Grayson's face twisted with rage. He shoved Keanu hard, forcing him back a step. Don't lecture me, you filthy bum. I don't care about your bleeding heart nonsense. Get out before I have you thrown out. The physical aggression snapped something inside Keanu. He stumbled but caught himself, his hands clenching into fists. He'd tried patience, he'd tried reason, now he was done. Reaching into his pocket, Keanu pulled out his wallet and extracted his ID, holding it up for all to see. "Read it," he demanded, thrusting the card toward Grayson. The doctor snatched it, his smirk faltering as his eyes scanned the name. Keanu Reeves. A hush fell over the room, thick and electric. Emily gasped audibly, her hands flying to her mouth. Grayson's face drained of color, his bravado crumbling like a house of cards. This can't be real," he stammered, turning the ID over as if expecting it to vanish. "It's real," Keanu said, his voice cold and unyielding. "I'm Keanu Reeves, and you just made the biggest mistake of your life." He took a step closer, his presence towering despite his soaked shirt and mud-streaked jeans. "You mocked me, you refused to help a dying animal, and now? You're gonna regret it." Grayson's hands shook as he handed the ID back, his arrogance replaced by panic. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know. I'm so sorry, I swear it was a misunderstanding. Please, let me fix this. We'll treat your dog right now, no charge." His voice cracked, desperation seeping through every word. Emily nodded frantically behind him, her earlier scorn forgotten. Yes, we'll do anything you want." Keanu held up a hand, silencing them both. His eyes burned with a quiet fury, the kind that didn't need shouting to be felt. "No," he said simply. "Your apologies mean nothing. I've seen who you are, both of you. You don't care about animals or people. You care about profit, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it." He turned to the stunned onlookers, his voice rising just enough to carry. "This isn't about me. It's about every life you've turned away, every soul you've judged unworthy. I'll make you regret this, not just today, but for as long as I can." Mrs. Margaret stepped forward again, her expression a mix of awe and resolve. "Mr. Reeves, I had no idea, but I'm glad someone's standing up to this. It's wrong, what they've done." Keanu nodded at her, a silent acknowledgement, but his focus remained on Grayson. The doctor's knees seemed to buckle under the weight of his own miscalculation, his earlier threats now laughable in the face of Keanu's revelation. Titan whimpered softly at Keanu's feet, drawing his attention back to the reason he was here. The dog's eyes fluttered open, dazed but alive. Keanu knelt beside him, whispering, "Hang on, buddy. I've got you." But in his mind a plan was forming, a reckoning that would shake this clinic to its core. Grayson had no idea what was coming, and that ignorance would be his undoing. The air in Silver Paw Veterinary Clinic hung heavy with tension, the silence punctuated only by Titan's ragged breathing as he lay at Keanu's feet. The revelation of his identity had turned the room into a frozen tableau, Dr. Victor Grayson's face a mask of dread, Emily's hands trembling behind the reception desk, and the onlookers caught between shock and anticipation. But Keanu wasn't finished. He'd exposed their cruelty, but words alone wouldn't save Titan or undo the damage inflicted by this place. Action would. Keanu pulled out his phone, his fingers steady despite the storm raging within. He dialed Daniel, the manager of Hope Shelter, his voice low but urgent when the call connected. "Daniel, it's Keanu. I'm at Silver Paw Veterinary Clinic with Titan. He's had another seizure, worse this time. I need you here now with whatever meds you've got. These people won't help." Daniel's response was immediate, his tone sharp with concern. "I'm on my way. Hold tight, Keanu. I'll be there in 10. Hanging up, Keanu knelt beside Titan, brushing a hand over the pit bull's sweat-dampened fur. "You're tougher than they know, buddy," he murmured, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. But as he waited, movement outside the clinic's glass doors caught his eye. A man stood there, hunched and weary, cradling a small, sickly dog in his arms. His clothes were tattered, his face etched with desperation as he peered inside, clearly afraid to enter after what he'd witnessed through the window. Keanu rose and stepped outside, the cool air a stark contrast to the clinic's sterile chill. The man flinched as Keanu approached, clutching his dog tighter. "Hey," Keanu said gently, raising a hand to signal peace. "What's wrong with your dog?" The man's voice cracked as he answered. "His name's Rusty. He's been coughing blood for days. I tried getting help here, but they threw me out, said I'm trash just like him." His eyes brimmed with tears, shame and fear warring within them. Keanu's jaw tightened, a fresh wave of anger surging through him. He reached into his wallet, pulling out a stack of bills, hundreds, more than enough to cover treatment, and pressed them into the man's trembling hands. "Take this," he said firmly. "Go to Hope Shelter a few blocks from here, ask for Daniel. He'll take care of Rusty, no questions asked. Tell him Keanu sent you." The man, Jack as he introduced himself, stared at the money, then at Keanu, disbelief etched across his weathered face. Why would you do this for me?" "Because no one should be turned away when they're hurting," Keanu replied, his voice soft but resolute. "Not you, not Rusty. Go now. They'll help you." Jack nodded, clutching the cash and Rusty as he shuffled off, a glimmer of hope breaking through his despair. Keanu watched him go, the encounter stealing his resolve. This wasn't just about Titan anymore. It was about every soul this clinic had failed. He turned back to the clinic, pushing through the doors with a purpose that filled the room like a thunderclap. Grayson was still there, pacing nervously, his earlier arrogance replaced by a jittery attempt at damage control. "Mr. Reeves," he began, his voice oily with false sincerity, "please, let's talk this out. I'll treat your dog myself, right now, no cost. We can put this behind us." Keanu stopped inches from him, his presence towering despite the mud-streaked jeans and soaked shirt. "Put it behind us?" he echoed, his tone laced with disgust. "You think this is about me? About one dog? This is about every life you've spat on because they didn't fit your precious bottom line." Grayson opened his mouth to protest, but Keanu cut him off, his voice rising with a controlled fury. "I don't just want you to lose your job, Grayson. I want this place to belong to people who deserve it, people who'd rather save a life than count a dollar." Grayson's face twisted, a mix of fear and defiance flaring up. "You think you can threaten me? This clinic's mine. It built it from nothing. You're just a washed-up actor playing hero." The insult landed like a pebble against a fortress, and Keanu's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "Keep talking," he said quietly. "Every word you say is fuel for what's coming." Without another glance at Grayson, Keanu pulled out his phone again, this time opening the camera app. He hit record, turning the lens on himself as he stood in the middle of the waiting room. "This is Keanu Reeves," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I'm at Silver Paw Veterinary Clinic, where I've just been refused treatment for a dying dog because they thought I couldn't pay. They mocked me, threatened me, and turned away others in need. This isn't medicine, it's cruelty. Share this, hold them accountable." He panned the camera to Grayson and Emily, their faces paling as the reality sank in, then ended the video and posted it online. Fair use be damned, this was a public reckoning. As the upload bar ticked to completion, Keanu made another call, this one to his lawyer. "Mark," he said, keeping his voice low, "I need you to dig into Silver Paw Veterinary Clinic. Ownership records, financials, everything. I want to buy it, quietly, fast, price doesn't matter. Call me when it's done." He hung up, slipping the phone back into his pocket, his mind racing with the plan taking shape. Grayson didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath him was already shifting. The clinic doors burst open minutes later, and Daniel rushed in, a medical bag slung over his shoulder. He knelt beside Titan, pulling out a syringe of anti-seizure medication. "Hang on, big guy," he muttered, administering the dose with practiced precision. Titan's breathing steadied, his body relaxing as the drug took hold. Daniel looked up at Keanu, his eyes wide with questions. "What the hell happened here?" Keanu gestured toward Grayson and Emily, his voice grim. "They happened. Refused to help, threw insults instead. But it's over now, or it will be soon." Daniel frowned, sensing the weight behind Keanu's words, but nodded. "Let's get Titan back to Hope Shelter. He needs rest, monitoring. You coming?" "In a minute," Keanu said, his gaze fixed on Grayson. I've got one last thing to say. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. You think you're untouchable, don't you? That this clinic's your kingdom. Enjoy it while it lasts. Because I'm taking it from you, not just your job, everything. And when I do, it'll be a place where people like Jack, like Titan, aren't trash to be swept aside. Grayson laughed nervously, but it was a hollow sound, cracking under the pressure of Keanu's stare. You're bluffing, you can't just... Keanu cut him off with a single look, the kind that promised consequences too vast to fathom. Watch me, he said, then turned to help Daniel lift Titan. As they carried the pit bull toward the exit, the waiting room remained silent, every eye following the man who'd just turned their world upside down. Grayson's empire was crumbling, and Keanu was the architect of its fall. The tale of Keanu Reeves and Titan isn't just a personal triumph. It's a beacon of compassion, piercing through the darkness of prejudice and greed. From Dr. Grayson's scorn to Keanu transforming Silverpaw into a symbol of hope, we learn that justice isn't merely punishing the wrongdoer. It's about building a better world where every life is treated with dignity. This story teaches us not to judge by appearances, for kindness and resilience often hide in the humblest souls. It's a call to stand up, act, and believe in our own power to change things. Keanu's journey inspires us to rise above apathy and make a difference. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Your support fuels us to keep delivering meaningful content like this. Let's keep the inspiration flowing. Join us for more incredible stories ahead.